We will start with item 1, which is a COVID update, and then move item 2 to 3 and item 3 to 2. So item 1, time has been set aside for an update on COVID-19 mitigation measures, funding, and appropriations and related legal matters. Mr. Manager?
Mayor, members of the council, a couple things. One, I did receive some notes from Dr. Cullen from Pima County Health Department. I just wanted to let you know our COVID levels are still at medium, so that is cause for us to be cautious. They did make recommendations. I'll send you a copy of this. She is still making a recommendation that people consider social distancing, et cetera, as they see fit or appropriate, particularly if they have concerns about their health, and I think that's important to note. So I do have that, Mayor. I'll be happy to send that out. It also has some more detail on some of the things, and I just got that. Otherwise, I'd have sent that to you previously. Also wanted to let the Mayor and Council know that our restriction for travel for unvaccinated, I still had that on the books. I will lift that. Pima County has lifted theirs as well. And that's for those employees that have either filed for an exemption or an accommodation and were approved. We had a restriction on travel. I will be lifting that via my authority to establish an administrative directive accordingly. So happy to answer any questions, Mayor. Again, it's just a reminder for everybody to be diligent in keeping each other safe and following all the protocols that we've been through many, many times. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I also want to thank Dr. Cullen for providing us an update. The presentation has been shared by the city clerk, I believe. The CDC determines COVID-19 community level each week based on 3 metrics: new COVID-19 hospital admissions per 100,000 population, percentage of staffed inpatient beds occupied by COVID-19 patients, and total COVID-19 cases per 100,000 population. Pima County is currently at a medium COVID-19 community level. As of last Thursday, we're at 26.25% positivity rate with 211.02 COVID cases per 100,000 people in the last 7 days. We still thankfully have a low number of COVID-19 admissions per 100,000 people at hospitals, which is 7.8 admissions in a 7-day period, and 2.7% of staffed inpatient beds occupied by COVID-19 patients. We are meeting the CDC's metrics for timely case investigation for public health tracing and prevention, and about 74.4% of our population 5 years and older have completed an initial vaccine series. Vaccines, again, I want to remind the community, vaccines are still available through Pima County Health Department, as well as many local pharmacies and clinics. Now vaccines are available for infants and children over 6 months of age or older. Everyone over the age of 5 is eligible for first booster, and people who have certain risk factors, and everyone over the age of 50 are eligible for a second booster. It's not too late to get your first or second shot if you haven't been vaccinated. Check the CDC website or the Pima County .gov website and go to Pima County Health Department for additional information. I just wanted to make sure that we reiterated and appreciate the efforts of Dr. Cullen and the Pima County Health Department to continue to use an equity lens and find solutions to these challenging times in the city of Tucson. So again, if you test positive, Pima County can potentially set you up with a prescription for free COVID-19 antiviral pills through a new test to treat program. You have to call 520-724-7895 or visit their East Clinic at 6920 East Broadway Boulevard, available Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and Saturdays, 10 to 2. So there are options if you do test positive and are concerned about your reaction to COVID-19. With that, I'm opening it up to my colleagues just in case they have any points or any comments or questions. Councilmember Fimbres?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Michael, what is the policy or the process or the procedure for somebody to test positive in your unit? For a city employee, it tests positive. The second question is, what about the monkeypox? I understand we also have a first case of monkeypox reported today by Channel 13.
Mayor, I'll address the second question first. Thank you, Councilmember Fimbres. The monkeypox, because this is the COVID-19 update, I didn't address that, but in the presentation materials, it is included. So you'll see that as we send that. I believe that Suzanne sent that out, so you'll have that. With regard to someone testing positive, the protocols are per CDC, basically to isolate until there are no symptoms, and I believe there's a time frame after the symptoms have subsided, and then they're able to return to work. So that's the current policies. Again, it's a function of both Pima County and CDC, and we're trying to stay consistent with what their guidance has been.
Is there anything we should be doing, going back to masking or anything else that we need to do? Be precautious, Michael, Madam Mayor.
Mayor, Councilmember Fimbres, at this time, that is not the recommendation from the Pima County Health Department or CDC, although keep in mind that we are following the CDC criteria for the levels of cases. We are still at the medium range. If we go to high transmission, then we may see those requirements and recommendations come through in the very near term. But at this time, there are no requirements for that. Keep in mind that materials that we have provided or were provided from Pima County also include recommendations for continuing to be mindful, particularly if you have immune deficiencies or other health concerns, that you should continue to practice social distancing and masking when in public.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Fimbres. Any other of my colleagues? Alrighty, well, thank you so much. And again, thanks to Dr. Cullen for sending us the information. All of you should have the report that she sent us, the slide report that she sent us, and we will absolutely keep vigilant to make sure that we're keeping all of us and the community as safe as we possibly can. With that, we're going to go to item 3, which is our water item. Time has been set aside for a review and discussion of the Tucson Water Community Engagement Plan, PFAS Health Advisories, and an update on the Colorado River System Conservation Agreements for 22-23. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. As you mentioned, this is a 3-part conversation. I won't reiterate them, but there's 3 distinct pieces to this. John Kamick, our water director, will outline for you a presentation and then open it up to questions. Thank you, Mayor. John.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council. Yes, we have a 3-part today on this water update. So the first part we're going to get into is related to Tucson Water's current planning efforts that's been ongoing for the last several years. It's called One Water 2100. It's different than our planning efforts in the past because we have a unique focus on this. We are looking at water in our community in the broadest aspect. We are not only focusing on groundwater that we have rights to and access to, Colorado River water, effluent, but we also are throwing in rainwater, stormwater, and everything to completely have an integrated water plan that meets the full urban water cycle for the city of Tucson. So we started this effort in 2019, and we've had some interruptions because of the pandemic, but we're ready to roll on with this. So I have Ms. Candace Rubrick here, who is going to lead a quick presentation on our next steps, which is community engagement. But again, this focus is that all water in the Tucson community has value. So, Candace.
Effort. Next slide, please. As John mentioned, our water approach is an integrated approach to resource management that values all sources. And we've been sharing this with the community now for several years, this messaging about integrating our water supplies and making sure that the right source matches the right use. Next slide. So I'm going to give you just a brief recap of where we've been and where we're headed. So as John mentioned, we launched this in 2019. There was a bit of a hiatus in the early part of the pandemic, but that was really setting the foundation and setting the stage for moving forward into this larger planning effort. So we last year established a clear direction through a scenario planning process and the development of technical memos. And moving forward through 2022 and 2023, we're working on community engagement and adoption. Next slide, please. We developed a scenario planning process, which many of you provided input into, and these 8 drivers that could have real impacts on the future of our community and our water system came out of that process as the most important drivers. Next slide. So these 8 drivers were refined by our scenario planning process through significant stakeholder engagement and input. And the top 2 that rose out of that are supply diversification and demand. And these 2 most important drivers, as determined by the stakeholders, really built these 4 different conditions or scenarios that you see here. The most ideal of these conditions being the top left, which is the sustainable oasis. This is where demand would be down and supply would be more resilient and more diversified. So the steps moving forward are to really figure out with the community how we stay in and get to an even more sustainable oasis environment and community. So as we move forward, we're working with the community to identify strategies and mitigation options to help get to that sustainable oasis ideal. Next slide, please. These are the goals as have been laid out for the next phase, moving toward our One Water Master Plan. So just to highlight, we're looking to receive broad feedback from the community, increase awareness of our One Water approach and really what that means for Tucson, build on the scenario planning outcomes that we received and have identified earlier in the process, identify management strategies and mitigation options that will really address those key drivers of supply diversification and demand management to manage the risk to our water supply and demand. Through that work, we'll develop a prioritization framework, and then working with these stakeholders would prioritize the management strategies and mitigation options that are identified in this current phase. Next slide. So here I have a couple slides that are just laying out the timeline and what to expect from the Water Department over the next year plus and how we're engaging with the community. So we're launching this summer. We have a kickoff event, a large town hall meeting set for August 16th at the TCC. That will be followed up by a series of stakeholder meetings that will take place this fall. We have 3 workshops set where we'll be looking at future scenarios, again, looking at those management strategies and mitigation options, moving into a prioritization effort, and then really working to prioritize all of those options that help get us to that sustainable oasis ideal. We will also be deploying a survey online, and we'll be out in the community at different events conducting that survey. Both the town hall and the survey will be presented in English and in Spanish. I wanted to make note of that. So these surveys will be distributed as widely as possible because this is really our big public engagement effort to get as much community input as possible. So we'll be looking for lots of opportunities to partner on distributing this survey. All right, next slide, please. So after this community engagement work is done this fall, we are coming back to council in December with the outcomes of this engagement effort. So we'll be here sharing what we've learned both from the scenario planning, stakeholder engagement workshops, as well as from that public survey that will be distributed across the community. So that will take place in December of this year. And then from there, staff will be working on developing the actual master plan, informed by the engagement work that's done this year, as well as the technical memos that have already been developed in 2021. So there will be a rough draft developed by staff, reviewed by the director, of course, and CWAC, and then we anticipate the first draft of this master plan to come back to council in September of 2023. And then after review and feedback, we'll be looking to seek approval of that master plan in November of 2023 ahead of the next general plan adoption. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions on the engagement plan? Any feedback? All righty.
There's more coming, right?
Yes, there is more coming. This is a long item.
Madam Mayor,
Councilmember Fimbres.
thank you. One of those community hearings like I've done at Pueblo in Ward 5 on the history of the water issue situations.
So just a question, John, in terms of the engagement in areas that have traditionally and historically been, we've seen, tainted water and concerns about TCE and PFAS and all that. There are community coalitions and neighborhoods that are concerned. And so just wanted to make sure, I'm guessing I'm adding my voice to the statement made by Councilmember Fimbres about engaging communities that are bilingual communities.
Yep, yeah, that's the Honorable Mayor, members of council, that's a full intent, is to make sure we reach out to all interested stakeholders in the water sphere, which include all of those affected communities, particularly in Ward 5. Yeah.
Any others? Alrighty, keep us posted. It sounds like a great plan.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I'll move on to the next item. A quick PFAS update. This is kind of off schedule. I still plan to do a PFAS quarterly update that we've been doing the last couple of years in one of the August meetings. But there was some recent development by the EPA just a few weeks ago that it's important to brief council on that now. So on June 15th, the EPA did adjust some health advisories related to PFAS. Two of the advisories that were already in place for the compounds PFOA and PFOS, which were originally at 70 part per trillion combined. Both were essentially reduced to 0, or in our world we call non-detect, and that's the below the detectable quantitative limit of our instruments at the laboratory, which is less than 2 part per trillion. But then they also added 2 more additional PFAS compounds that they're looking at a national level, and that is PFBS and another compound called GenX. PFBS, the EPA has given an initial health advisory of 2,000 part per trillion, and GenX has an initial advisory at 10 part per trillion. Of note, because Tucson Water has been having operational standards now for the last couple of years related to PFAS compounds, Tucson Water already had an operational standard for PFBS, so this is the EPA coming closer to meeting where we're at. Our operational standard has been 420 part per trillion. So even though the EPA just created a standard at 2,000, we're still going to maintain our more conservative approach at 420 part per trillion. The other one that was created, GenX, is a little more commonly known with manufacturing of perfluorinated compounds, particularly on the East Coast and in the Midwest. We have started to look for GenX in the Tucson area. Good thing is we have not detected any GenX compounds, so we will be incorporating, though, the EPA health advisory now into our screening, so we'll be screening for 7 operational guided targets, and we'll be using GenX at 10. So just the update, put that all together for the community. Of the 7 compounds that we do look at and compare against our water supply is PFOA and PFOS will be at non-detect levels now. PFHXS will have a threshold of 7 part per trillion. PFHPA, another 7 part per trillion threshold. PFBS continue at 420, and PFHXA at 200 part per trillion, and GenX at 10 part per trillion. So with that, I can answer any questions related to the new update.
Can you expand, John, on the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed that includes funding for PFAS and PFOS remediation, and how we're approaching applying for these funds for Tucson.
Yes, I can. Honorable Mayor, members of council. So last December, the bipartisan infrastructure bill was passed, and embedded within that bill, there were multiple ways to get funding related to PFAS or contaminants of emerging concern throughout the United States. One of the first disbursements of monies to the state of Arizona is through the Arizona WIFA program, and that's making monies available to public and private utilities to gain access, and what should be, and what we're looking for is 100% forgivable principal loans related to those compounds. We've entered into negotiations with Arizona WIFA at 3 key projects utilizing that infrastructure money. The first is bringing back some affected wells we have in the northwest part of our system that have limited impact but are miles away from the sources of contamination. We have some struggles with operational needs in that area, so being able to treat those wells, get them back to the system, will provide resiliency for those areas up there. Also, we are going to be looking for funding to support the Reclaim Water program. The Reclaim Water system has been affected by PFAS and other compounds of emerging concern. So moving forward with that is advanced treatment on the Reclaim Water system, making the Reclaim Water system as clean as possible for our whole community. And lastly, on that item, we are looking for monies for the new rules associated with the lead and copper rule, not associated with PFAS, but the lead and copper rule. Monies have been made available to do that over the next couple of years to meet the new regulations. In addition, there's been new monies that are coming out through the EPA that was granted directly monies through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, and they are now working collaboratively with the states on how to deploy that funding. That funding looks like it's better suited for dealing with highly contaminated areas, like what we have outside of the 2 air facilities in this area. So we've been talking with ADEQ, and we are working with them in support to be able to access those monies and make sure they're deployed to at least treat the highly impacted areas outside of the 2 Air Force bases, or 2 air bases.
So outside of DM and Arizona National Guard,
Correct.
which is in the south side?
Yep.
Okay. And what is the possibility of those funds in terms of working with ADEQ on that? Is it a reasonable amount of funds to be able to start attacking that issue?
Honorable Mayor, those are things that we're looking at with ADEQ right now to understand the level of funding that the state will be getting. The good thing is ADEQ has been a great partner with us for the last several years, particularly starting the pilot treatment plant outside of Davis-Monthan. So they are energized, and this is at the top of their radar, if you will, to get additional funding to do more full-scale treatment in the Tucson area.
Any other comments by my colleagues on the council? Questions? Councilmember Kozachik?
Just real quickly, I'll have more after the next piece of this, but is the fact that the EPA still only issued a health advisory and not an MCL, does that affect our ability to access these dollars at all?
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Kozachik, not that we think of, no, because there's EPA and the Bipartisan Act actually identified emerging contaminants, so contaminants without regulatory standards right now. So every indication is we're going to be able to access these dollars because of the national occurrence of PFAS and some of these other compounds to be able to directly use it.
And because of the way they worked together, do we expect EPA to change the advisory to an MCL at some point in the near future?
Councilmember Kozachik, all indications from EPA is that they are looking to create some MCLs by the end of 2022. I would anticipate it would be for PFOA and PFOS.
Good, cool.
And then just for the benefit of the community, can you state what the practice that City of Tucson Water has been in terms of removing certain wells with high levels of PFAS from our drinking water service? And if you want to expand anything further on that.
Yeah, thank you, Honorable Mayor. Yeah, just to reiterate for the community of Tucson and all of our Tucson water customers, we operate with essentially a zero tolerance with regards to PFAS compounds. We continually screen our wells, and where we do see occurrence, if they come up, we take those wells out of service or put them in a highly restricted role for emergency use only. So to date, we still have 25 wells that are out of service across the Tucson Central well field and up through the northwest side. In addition, in June of 2021, we did remove the TARP system from the drinking water supply because of the threat that we saw with increasing PFAS levels entering the TARP capture zone.
All righty. Any other comments or questions from my colleagues on this particular piece of the presentation? All righty. Richard? Council member? Oh, he's muted. Okay.
Madam Mayor, thank you. How does Tucson Water determine levels of PFAS in water? Sorry, I was muted.
Honorable Mayor, Councilmember Fimbres, Tucson Waters has an advanced water quality lab, and we do the standard methodology by EPA to look for PFAS-related compounds. So we're able to do that in-house with our own assets to ensure quick turnaround time for whenever we do sample any of our production wells out in the system.
We also look at Lake Mead. What's going on over there?
We're,
Water being sucked up.
Councilmember Fimbres, we're gonna talk about that in a bit. It's part of the presentation, but John
Okay,
hasn't gotten there. Okay, excellent. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, thank you, John. I'm grateful for how proactive Tucson Water has been with PFOAs and PFAS compounds in our drinking water. My question is around the EPA considering a PFAS national drinking water regulation, and what does that mean? And then are we pursuing other federal funds, specifically through the Emerging Contaminants and Smaller Disadvantaged Communities grant?
Yes, Councilmember Santa Cruz. Yes, we are. I'm trying to remember the first question. Oh, the first question goes to there. Yeah, we do anticipate a standard coming out soon, and that just means it goes from an advisory or a guidance level to an actual regulated compound under the Safe Drinking Water Act. How that will affect Tucson is really not much because we are operating under a very conservative approach where we're looking at those health advisories as if they were maximum contaminant limits now and being ultra conservative for our community with respect to water quality. In discussing with Arizona WIFA and ADEQ, given the demographics of the Tucson community going over to the funding, we fully believe that we will meet the criteria of a disadvantaged community, which will put us in ahead of the line, if you will, for being able to acquire funding through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act.
Thank you. Any others? Alrighty, let's move on to the next item on this agenda item.
Okay, last one, Honorable Mayor, members of council, is an update on the conditions on Lake Mead and the action items that we were given in May of this year about potentially pursuing participating in system conservation, making an offer of our remaining CAP water supply for the calendar year 2022 to be possibly used as to shore up declining lake levels in Lake Mead. There were several items that we were focusing on during to be a comfortable participant in adding additional water to Lake Mead, and some of those were that we would be compensated, and someone outside of the state of Arizona would compensate us, i.e. the federal government, for whatever water we leave behind, as well as making sure that others participated. This was based on an invitation by the Gila River Indian community that we move forward with your direction. And I'm happy to say that between the Gila River Indian community, the city of Tucson, the city of Phoenix, the city of Scottsdale, and Peoria, there's 4 major municipal partners who are all actively examining adding more water to the system. Just last week, the city of Phoenix did decide to add an additional 14,000 acre feet. So they are joining into the participation. And this item now is for us to discuss the city of Tucson's movements in that direction.
Mr. Rankin.
And thank you, Mayor, and thank you, John. I've just circulated, just to follow up on what John's been saying, a motion that we're going to, the manager and I are going to ask the mayor and council to consider and give direction on and approval of at today's study session. As John was referencing, you had a discussion on May 19th, initially in executive session, but then in the public session, where you unanimously, as the mayor and council, authorized and directed the city manager, the city attorney, and staff to engage in the negotiations that John was just describing with the Gila River Indian Community, City of Phoenix, other Arizona cities, and key stakeholders with respect to being CAP users, in order to try to create these agreements that could at least delay potentially a Tier 2B shortage declaration through cooperative system conservation efforts. And you authorized the manager and staff to proceed and begin these negotiations with these other parties, but to come back to you and report where those negotiations were. As John was explaining, and since that date in May, staff have in fact been engaging in those negotiations with the parties John just described, as well as with the United States Department of Interior, CAP, GRIC, and the other cities. Based on those negotiations and the timeline that we're under, where the opportunity to meaningfully engage in these system conservation efforts really has to happen by the end of this month, that we are asking for the mayor and council to go ahead and move forward with a motion today that would authorize the mayor and the city manager to execute system conservation agreements with the relevant parties, so long as those agreements include specific terms. And so I've passed out a written version of the motion so that you can follow along as to what those terms would be, because we would need very clear authority that we're carrying out the direction and the approval of the mayor and council by executing those agreements. So specifically, the requested motion would read, I move that the mayor and council authorize Mayor Romero and the city manager to execute system conservation agreements with the United States and Central Arizona Project to enhance system conservation relating to Lake Mead, and to adopt ancillary agreements with other Arizona system conservation partners, including the Gila River Indian Community, Scottsdale, Peoria, and Phoenix, so long as the agreements incorporate all of the following terms. First, the city of Tucson would agree to allow up to 30,000 acre feet of its allocated CAP water to remain in Lake Mead in each of the next 2 years, so specifically the 2022 and 2023 allocations, for a total of not more than 60,000 acre feet. And if necessary to avoid a Tier 2B shortage in 2023, the mayor and city manager may authorize the agreements for these additional system conservation efforts in 2022 as against the 60,000 acre foot total. So in other words, if it makes sense to put more of the 60,000 acre feet into the first year versus doing it 30 and 30, but still being capped at an overall total of 60,000 acre feet. Secondly, the city would need to be compensated for the value of this water at market rates. This compensation could be through a combination of direct funding, long-term storage credits, and/or intentionally created surplus credits. And so this is going to what John was just describing about getting full value for our allocation. Third, the agreements must ensure that by agreeing to conserve its CAP water in Lake Mead, the city would not be deemed to have used, it's a term of art, that water for purpose of calculating any reductions in future CAP allocations, and that the city's actions to conserve its water in Lake Mead in 2022 would act as a credit against any reductions in the city's future CAP allocations that may be ordered by the Department of Interior for 2023. So in other words, we need to ensure through these agreements that if we engage in these conservation efforts in 2022, That's going to be a credit for us against any ordered reductions that may happen in 2023. And that's important because you all know the Secretary and the Department of Interior recently requested the users of Colorado River water to dramatically decrease their planned deliveries for 2023. The fourth condition that would have to be in these agreements in order to be authorized to move forward would be that the agreements protect the city from any increased O&M cost assessments from the CAP in connection with the city's reduced CAP order for each of the next 2 years. So in other words, we don't want to lose on the back end through increased O&M costs what we're saving through the reduced order for the CAP allocation. And finally, the agreements would not go beyond 2023. It would just be for these next 2 years. I would note that if this motion is approved by the mayor and council, it authorizes execution by the city through the mayor and the city manager. That also means that if for some reason it's ready and the mayor isn't available, by code and charter, the vice mayor could sign for the mayor and a designated assistant city manager could assign for the city manager. But in any event, it would have to satisfy all of these conditions.
Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
So there's a motion and a second. Just open up for discussion because it's very clear. I appreciate the motion because it's very, very clear as to where we stand. And my question would be if there were to be any changes in the negotiations that deviate from this motion, would we have to come back to mayor and council for an emergency meeting in order for us to meet the deadline of August to submit our order?
Mayor, members of the council, I would say yes. If it's any kind of substantive deviation from these fundamental points, then yes, this is the scope of the authorization that you would be giving as a legislative body.
My additional questions are, I'm really happy to hear that the cities of, where are they? Phoenix and Scottsdale and Peoria are joining the Gila River Indian community and Tucson and putting something on the table to put back into the lake. I guess my question is, what about the other users, right? There are so many more users that take from the Colorado River. Can you give us an update as to where the other users are and who they are?
Honorable Mayor, I don't have any direct knowledge of other users that are looking to conserve. One of the things that happened that's of significant importance between our May meeting and now is the announcement by the Secretary of the Interior that they're going to be looking for 2 to 4 million acre feet of direct shortage in the Colorado Basin altogether. So right now, all the state entities, RADWR and the other states are trying to figure out a plan on how to come up and meet those Secretary of Interior goals. So that's kind of a difference that happened.
But there are additional states, right? Who are the other users?
Well, the 7 basin states, you have the 3 in the lower basin, which is Arizona, Nevada, and California. And then you have the upper basin states of Utah, New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming, right? Yeah, got them.
Where are the discussions right now in terms of, that's 4 million acre feet. What we can do is what we can do, as the city's just outlined in the Gila River Indian community, but where's the conversation, right? What's the conversation and how do we get to 4 million acre feet?
Yeah, Honorable Mayor, members of council, I don't have any direct knowledge of what those closed-door discussions are with the Secretary between the states.
Okay. Any other comments? Councilmember Cunningham?
Yeah. A few things. One of the things that interests me in this whole process is how the SRP is generating about 750,000 acre feet a year, give or take, to the northern part of Arizona. And a lot of that goes into agriculture, but it's quite a yield, and it helps them with their water sustainability in that it's self-contained. I'm not sure it's the best most up-to-date way of surface water collection. But for the long term, that's an abbreviated solution for us. The other piece that I'd take a look at is while California is taking the lion's share of the surface water provided by the Colorado and Lake Mead, a significant amount of that is going into the Imperial Valley, which only gets 3 inches of rainfall per year. So it's I'm kind of going, okay, you're getting 3 inches of rainfall a year. We have another desert out here that's getting 12 to 15 inches of rainfall. Maybe we'd be better served wheeling it the other way and having that agriculture piece be on this side of the Colorado rather than that side of the Colorado. I mean, that's a bigger discussion than us, but it's time those ideas kind of get put forward. We have to see the big picture long-term for what Tucson's interests are. And what's really crazy about this is that we've been the best stewards. We have the lowest acre feet per capita use. We have a much better piece with our conservation. But if we can figure out a way to not be as reliant and kind of pave the way for restoring the Colorado to what it's supposed to be, I think everybody's going to be in better shape and everybody's going to benefit, even California. Finally, the last piece is I toured the water facility in California in Orange County a few years ago. They're actually able to take I want to say it's some 250,000 acre feet of reclaimed water, and they actually bring it back straight up in the system as potable. They use an ionization system. I called it the laser system because they technically run it through pipes that have lasers in it. And I thought that was kind of cool at the time, but better yet, it's also an option for us to be able to take the 36,000 acre feet that we're allotted, but the additional 21,000 acre feet that belongs to the county. That's a total of 57,000 acre feet a year that comes out of our wastewater. Even if we're shooting half of it and making half of it potable, that cost might be worth it. And we don't necessarily have to pump it directly back in the system. We can blend it and recharge it. There's a lot of different options to make it palatable, the same way we did with CAP 30 years ago. So I love that we're the leaders. I love that we're on our way, but we're not going to stay the leaders and we're not going to stay on our way unless we continue to offer the newer ideas and the newer alternatives. So I'm totally in favor of this motion, and it's well done, but we can go back to them with more things and say, hey, let's see the big picture here. But right now, there are 15 million people living in SoCal and another 5 million people living in Arizona. That's 20 million people, and with all due respect to the farmers at Coachella, they may not be the best place to farm, considering that they only get 4 inches of water a year.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham. I do see Chris Avery up on the mic. Do you want to address something?
Really quickly, Mayor Romero, Councilmember Cunningham, and members of the Mayor and Council. I did want to provide a brief update that the Salt River Project is also a participant in these discussions. We didn't mention them specifically because they won't be entering into a system conservation agreement. They don't have a Central Arizona project allocation, but they are helping to put some groundwater credits on the table and participate in this project. So what that means basically as between us, the Gila River Indian Community, City of Phoenix, Scottsdale, Shore Area, Salt River Project, you've got a wide cross-section of folks who are engaged just in this last-ditch effort in 2022. There are also dozens, a myriad of other participants who have already participated in compensated conservation agreements earlier in 2022 that are also part of this coalition. So we've got a really broad coalition of Arizona water users that are engaged in this effort. And I think in regards to your points with irrigation, the Secretary's call on June 15th means that all of us on the Colorado River are going to need to conserve industrial users, agricultural users, and the municipalities. And it's going to be a huge project moving forward into 2023 to figure out how to do that. But we believe that doing this in 2022 puts us in a better position going forward for 2023.
And all I was saying about SRP was that could serve as a template or a model for an abbreviated version down here, like a Pima area water project, a PAW, the Pima area water project or plan that allows us to capture some of that runoff on our own terms. So that's what I was saying about SRP, not I
Anyway,
appreciate their,
Just wanted to report that they are part of this discussion, and we look forward to working with them.
we
in-
could have
in
our own
this
version
effort.
down here. That's all I was saying.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Avery. Any others? Councilmember Kozachik?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks, Paul, for bringing up the 30,000 feet. Look, I don't want to come across as an hysteric, but in the last month, since May certainly, the EPA and the Bureau of Reclamation have forced a new urgency in every water policy decision we make. And together, between the EPA and the Bureau, they've made it very clear that we're running out of Colorado River water and that the contamination by PFAS may be more significant than we thought. And that's not hypothetical, that's our current reality. I mean, that's today. I'm not sure that the motion goes far enough. I know we talked about 30,000, we use 100,000, we get 144,000. You know, we have to assure that every policy level decision that we make now, in each one of them, we codify that every drop is clean, it's conserved, it's sourced properly, it's priced properly. Water's a bargain right now. I mean, it's really a bargain. And we've got to make that real to every consumer, every land use attorney, every developer. Everyone has to be a part of the solution, just as you're pointing out. Agriculture up in the Imperial Valley, you know, they're a part of this, just as Chris said, but so is Pinell County. And we have to be real in talking about pricing, about use of potable effluent. You know, I get the yuck factor and all that, but this is, like I said, this is a brave new world for us. Limited growth is another piece of this that we have to be talking about, coming with codifying things such as, like what Kevin brought up last time, net zero, as a policy commitment, not a commitment, not just a promise to do something later on, figure it out later on. So I appreciate the spirit behind this. I'm not sure 30,000 gets us where we need to be as a group of users on the Colorado River. I do have some questions that are similar to what the mayor brought up earlier. The reclamation wants us to have a game plan by August. Is that the 1st of August? Is it the 30th of August? When exactly is that required? What's the deliverable that they're after? Is that a deliverable from Tucson, from the 7 basin states? You kind of mentioned who's at the table. I think CWAC needs to be a part of this conversation as well. You've given the mayor and council a voice. I appreciate the notion of a special meeting if it goes beyond this, but I'm not sure this is a drop in the bucket figuratively compared to the 2 to 4 million acre feet that we're being called on to come up with. With respect to PFAS, we need to talk about when we start coming out of pocket for treatment plants. We don't have 3 years to wait on the Department of Defense to figure this out. I'd like to know what the Department of Defense's new approach is, given the fact that they've been leaning on 70 parts per trillion as their benchmark, as their measuring stick, and now it's 0.0004. They've been more or less hiding behind 70 parts per trillion. We have 3M litigation. I'm interested in knowing how the EPA ruling is going to affect Napoli and Skolnick's approach to this, to that whole issue. I mean, in the past 2 weeks, the whole water conversation tilted the world on its axis, at least our part of the world. And while I appreciate the 30,000 acre feet, this is 2 to 4 million acre feet is serious stuff. And I think the last thing that we want is for the Department of Interior to step in and impose a solution on us. So if we have to do more, much more than that, I'm all in on it. And I guess that's sort of my, well, one more player that we haven't mentioned. And I sent an email to Eric Rodebush. He's over at the Tucson Airport Authority. He's their risk management guy a couple of weeks ago. He's been totally silent. And what I asked him was, what testing for PFAS have you done on the airport property? We own the property, but they're leasing it from us. They need to map the airport property so that they know where the plume is on their property, because the Air National Guard operated out there by Plant 44 for years and years. And so we know they were using AFFF, the firefighting foam that caused the contamination. They need to be mapping the airport property and feeding that information to us so we can use it when we're tracking the plume up of the AOC and the tar plant. But they're silent. So a lot more players in this thing that need to be at the table. So I guess I'll be supportive of the motion with the caveat that I don't think it goes far enough, given our new reality.
And I do see Mr. Avery up on the mic, so did you want to address something?
Councilmember Kozaczek, Mayor Romero, members of the council. Steve, I have a couple of answers to a couple of your questions, but not answers to all of them. But with respect to the timeline, this August timeline is important because that's when the Bureau does modeling for the following calendar year. So what they need is a system conservation agreement from us and the participants in order to put those inputs into the model and see what elevation for Lake Mead comes out of it. So that's the driver for that. That's why we've got to do it now. And that's why Phoenix also sought authorization to get designated authority to sign their system.
So let me interrupt
agreement.
just to make sure I understand. So they're going to take everybody's system conservation plan, add them all up and throw it into a model and see how close that comes to 2 million?
No, what they're gonna do is they're gonna run all those inputs into the model and see how close that comes to 2050 or 1050 or 1045 feet of elevation in Lake Mead, and that in turn sets the level of shortage for 2023. So that's the important thing here is that, you talk about this a small amount of water, but we're at a level where 5 feet of water in Lake Mead makes a difference between having M&I priority and Indian priority water come through the canal next year or having cuts of those allocations come through the canal. And so we've basically assembled a coalition that puts a foot of water into Lake Mead. That's when you're talking about 5 feet and in a big lake, that foot of water means something, and it could mean a lot for the modeling. That's what we're hoping for, and that's why we're here. With respect to the DOD participation and the implications of the new health advisories, I know we're going to have a discussion in 2 days that's facilitated by your office, where we're going to have representatives from the Department of Defense, the airport, everyone in to talk about that. I obviously think that the designation of health advisories matters in terms of future legal consequences, especially because I think they foretell where the MCLs are going to come, and it's much easier for me to talk about the legal implications of an MCL than legal implications of health advisory. But what it means really, Councilmember Kozaczek and members of the Mayor and Council, is that we've been on the right track on this for a long time. That instead of waiting for the regulations to hit us and then to respond, we've anticipated what the regulations are going to be. We've paid as much attention as we can, and we've tried to take actions as quickly as we could in order to be able to deal with it. And in terms of percents, I just want to say that under this agreement, we're committing 60,000 acre feet of City of Tucson M&I allocation toward this effort. If everyone on the Colorado River were to put a proportional amount of water into this deal that we're putting in, we'd be able to come up with that 2 to 4 million acre feet. So, it's significant because we are playing fairly in this game, and if other people want to play the same way we're playing, we can solve this problem. If they don't, then we'll have to figure out what we do next.
That's fair enough. We're solving it for 2 years.
Yep.
And in 3 years, the Colorado River and Lake Mead is not going to be back up to 1075.
And we will continue to be as resilient and as smart as we can in dealing with whatever comes our way.
And I agree with Mr. Avery's assessment that the city of Tucson and this mayor and council and previous mayor and councils have been preparing for this moment for a very, very long time. Now, I absolutely agree with you, Councilmember Kozaczek, that we need to know what other users are doing, right? We, the city of Tucson and Tucson Water, have been for decades making sure that we are as conservative as we possibly can be with the usage of our water in conserving and being, we just talked about the One Water plan that we have, and that's for future planning, but it's also something that we're already doing, right? For the last 14 years that I've been on the council, either as a council member or mayor, we put together the conservation system and the conservation program so that we can incentivize additional conservation measures by each and every one of the users of our Tucson water system. And so we are in a place where we can, add back to Lake Mead and Lake Powell. But I wouldn't want to go, even though we only use 100,000 acre feet a year, I would not want to go to the 44,000 in addition to the 30,000, right? So until we know exactly what the state of Arizona, with the Department of Interior, and what other users are willing to put back in, so that we are well protected in terms of what will come back either as credits or as our allocation up to the 144,000 acre feet. So my big question in all of this is, what are the other water users doing? And what are the other municipalities doing in terms of conservation measures, so that we can, we're all in this together. And so what is it that they're using what are the steps that they're taking to conserve water for the future of the states? And this has a lot to do as well with how they use their water, and what is their allocation, and what are the conservation steps that these municipalities are instituting in their jurisdictions. Any other questions? All righty, so we have a motion on the table and a second to the motion. All those in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much, John, really appreciate it. All righty, we're moving on to item 2, which is our equity office update. Item 2, time has been set aside for a discussion and presentation regarding the Office of Equity here in the city of Tucson. Mr. Manager?
Mayor, members of the council, this is the first time that Larice Walker has been in front of you to provide a review. And again, this is the program that you directed be created. Larice is our program manager. She's got several slides to go through and really give you an update on conversations that Larice has had with some of you, as well as with many of the directors, to really craft the plan and really the outcomes of the outcome of those first 100 days. So with that, I'll turn it over to Larice.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and members of the council. Yes, thank you. It's been a pleasure to serve as the city's first Chief Equity Officer here. So I just wanted to give an update on what I've done in my first 100 days and my visions for what's going forward. Next slide, please. So first, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are living and we are doing our work on land that is indigenous, and that, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribal nations, and Tucson specifically is home to our Tohono O'odham and our Paskayaki tribe. So I just wanted to make sure that we honor that space, especially when we're centering equity, and that's a big piece of that. So thank you. Next slide. Back in 2020, in September, you all as a governing body established the Office of Equity, and you really wanted this program to evaluate and to address the needs of our city through our legislative policies, through our departmental programs, but then also through our citywide practices. So I just wanted to reflect that, the equity statement for the city of Tucson says that we are here and we're committed to looking at our policies, our policy decision-making processes, and our delivery of services and distribution of resources through a lens that account for the different histories and the challenges of the constituents and the communities that we serve. So next slide, please. So I put up this illustration because, equity is achieved when we are looking at the quality of life and making sure that it is impartial and it's fair regardless, but not limited to age, gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, persons with disabilities, educational status, or socioeconomic status. And if you look at this illustration, it is a very good definition or visualization of what that means in this instance. You have individuals who need accommodations or resources allocated to them. In this instance, we're talking about a bike ride, so everyone needs a bike that's going to accommodate them. And essentially what equity looks like is making sure that they have all the needs and tools and resources to make sure that they can participate in that. Next slide, please. The purpose of the Equity Office is really to make sure that we are reflective and we are representing the unique perspectives of our visitors, of our businesses, and also the constituents in the city of Tucson. And in relationship to doing that, we will make sure that we are working in partnership with our executive leadership team, with our elected officials, with our professional staff of the organization to make sure that we are being champions of equity, we are making sure that we're being innovative and also inclusive and dismantling the barriers that have historically affected our marginalized and underserved communities. So the forming of the Equity Office here, just some foundational is, we will have a Chief Equity Officer. We are currently in the hiring process of our Executive Assistant as well as 2 project managers, one that will focus on community engagement and public participation. We'll also have a project manager focusing on data and looking at how the city is collecting data and also the use of demographic data. And we'll also be hiring for a program assistant who will work more internal facing with our departments, so providing some of that departmental leadership and support around capacity building to advance equity. So here I just wanted to show you, I'm not going to read everything on here, but this is just a snapshot of 30 plus objects or projects that I have been able to participate in, that I have been able to provide insight in. I've met with several different boards and commissions. I've met with several different external community stakeholders. I have met with the mayor's office as well as various council offices as well to get some background knowledge on what the city has done around equity. These conversations are not new, maybe the language is, but we have looked at how we look at public participation. We're talking about budget, how do we spend our money, and then we're also looking at how do we support existing policies and programs to make sure that we are addressing the needs and the concerns of the community. So these are just some of the things that I've done, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to stand for those addressing these. And then the next slide. So again, these are just some photos to capture some of the activities. I have been out in communities since I have been in Tucson. I am not native. I do come from the greater Twin Cities and Minneapolis, but I have been thrilled to just be a part of so many festivities. There's things like the Egg Extravaganza. I thought that was amazing. I've been looking at, going out to the magnet schools, Tucson Unified Magnet School District, and touring the schools, being a part of the Climate Action First public participation opportunity, and just various different things, conferences, and also looking at our landfill site and things like that, and learning more about what our city is doing to be more equitable. So now I would like to move us towards, what do I see for the next 4 to 12 months? In order for us to move this work forward, we have to start to normalize equity through the articulation of our, shared vision, our terminology, and our trainings. Looking at how do we both engage internal stakeholders, but then also our external stakeholders as well. And then how do we prioritize change in existing programs and areas that we can start with in the beginning. Next slide, please. So here, when we talk about normalizing equity with our trainings and terminology, it's really about breaking down what is individual, institutional, and structural racism. It is looking at what is implicit and explicit biases in the workplace. It's looking at generational differences. Right now, we are in a huge change of generational differences, especially in the workforce. So how do we prepare for that? It's also looking at and creating spaces of informal opportunities for staff to grow their capacity around equity. So something like lunch and learn opportunities where there will be different topics on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, and then making sure that from the highest level of our leadership, which is our elected officials, our leadership team, our managers and supervisors, but then professional staff and constituents, that we all know what we're talking about when we mean equity, and we're in one chord, one language, one sound. So speaking a little bit more about our internal stakeholders, so how I envision this is being set up is looking at our equity steering committee. This would be made up of our executive leadership team within the city. They will help provide leadership and support to the Office of Equity in implementing the strategies to move the work forward. Right now, we're also in the process of meeting with different council member offices and the mayor's office to address on how we can make sure that you are all engaged and we can participate effectively to move the work as well. One of my recommendations coming forth is an equity advisory committee that it was formerly a board and commission to make sure that we are appointing members of the community to be a part of this process, to make sure that their voices are heard, and we are truly providing opportunities for community to participate and giving them some type of empowerment to contribute their voices at the table. And then the last stakeholder group internally will be our departmental coordinators. So these will be individuals who will be coming from different departments, creating a cross-departmental functional team to help move the work forward. And ideally, we're looking for about 12 to 24 representatives at about 4,500 employees to make sure that we're moving the work as effectively as possible. Looking at our slide here to talk about how we would engage with our external stakeholders. Again, we want to make sure that we're intentional about the relationships in community. We want to make sure that we're reaching out to also our neighboring jurisdictions, so the county and state agencies as well, looking at our faith-based organizations, our public schools, and culturally specific organizations. How we plan to engage with them is allowing opportunities for one-on-one meetings, making sure that we're providing spaces for community-wide listening sessions. We would like to put on a website, once our website gets updated, to have a public comment forum where there's any concerns around equity. Community will have a place to put that. And then also just making sure that we're using and looking at existing community engagement data as well. Again, the work is not new for the city. Folks have been doing this work for several years, so making sure that we're capitalizing on data that exists. And the last thing I'll say about our external stakeholders is looking at our accessibility, so making sure that language interpretation is there, looking at ASL, looking at making sure we are providing opportunities to pay community for their time. Oftentimes that is a barrier for folks to come out of community, making sure we're going to the community to do listening sessions where they are, and then also making sure that we're visible and accessible by having office hours in community. So when I think about prioritization for the next 4 to 12 months, I've said it a few times now that inequities have been created over periods of time. They're not random, they just don't show up. So some of the things that we can be doing is looking into the use and the collection and the centralization of our demographic data so that it can inform us in the direction of where we're gonna go for our policies around equity, our programs around equity, and then also our initiatives. Looking at our public participation again, analyzing how to make sure that our community and stakeholders are actually a part of our decision-making process. And then diversifying our workforce, looking at retention, collecting consistent data. Right now, we do not currently have that data on retention on who's leaving the organization. So that's one of those policy initiatives or areas of focus that we would like to use data to inform us on how to prepare for the transition of our workforce. And then also looking at our services, making sure, again, that they're accessible to the communities that we're serving. Here, lastly, I would just like to share that what you can expect from us from the Office of Equity and our strategy. We are really here to serve as an internal consultant to the organization, so making sure that we are advising the city at all levels of the organization. We want to make sure that we are providing strategic alignment as well. We want to make sure that we are also at the forefront of managing some of those equity-driven initiatives. Again, building the capacity of both internal and external stakeholders to make sure that they have the skills and tools that they need to make sure that they can advance equity. And ultimately, all this does for us as a city embarking on this journey is give us greater trust and transparency between the community and also our work. And with that, I will stand for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Larice. A really great informative presentation, really appreciate it. I just wanted to include in terms of the comments that I have are that I think that Tucson is really leading on being able to create this office and hiring our first ever equity officer for the city of Tucson. I don't think a lot of people understand how generational some of this inequity is for especially people of color and low-income communities. We have to deal with the results of the effects of historic disparity and lack of investment experienced in many neighborhoods and people throughout the city of Tucson. I mean, it's not just happening in the city of Tucson, it is happening throughout the United States and, of course, other countries. But the vestiges of historic disparities, like redlining, and what that means still to this day for certain neighborhoods in our city. And the lack of opportunity for many people because of the color of their skin or their gender is something that we're still dealing with now. And so systems, many times, even though the people that are here now want to do as best as we possibly can, there are systems that were built on racist ideologies. And so we have to be able to get to the bottom of the systems that have created disparities and have created disparities for generations in our community and throughout our country. And so it's really wonderful to be able to have you here to look at our budget and how our systems, our departments internally, and how deliver services to our community with an equity lens so that we can move the needle on those disparities that have been historic in our city, all for the goal of offering an equal opportunity for every child of this city to be able to have an opportunity to prosper and be able to, be happy and well-prepared, well-educated citizen that will contribute to our city. And that's the big goal, right? But something that the city of Tucson is leading on, just like we're leading on so many other issues in conservation and et cetera. I want us to be a city that leads in equity and opportunity for each and every one of our residents. So I am really looking forward to your work in terms of dismantling all these systems that have been created before that we all want to see dismantled for the opportunity that we seek for our children. So just want to open it up for comments and questions from any of our colleagues on the council. All righty, Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Larice, for your presentation, and Mayor for your comments. I just reflecting on a meeting that community had with city manager back in 2018, where we first brought to his attention the need to have a chief equity officer in the city. And I was part of a community group with different generations of Tucsonans who have felt marginalized many times in their interactions with the city and tokenized. And it came from a city grant where the grant promised to work with community and really lead with those voices. And then there was a break of trust in that community once that didn't happen, once that didn't take place. And so we realized that it was a systems shift that needed to happen in how we work with our marginalized communities here in the city of Tucson, that we're not just there for going after grants and saying you're going to work with low-income communities, but that it really means that you listen. Because what happens, especially coming from academia and nonprofit groups, a lot of our communities are overstudied. We're overstudied. People build their careers on what's happening in these communities, but nothing ever changes, right? There's never material changes for folks. And so it was really important for me and coming into being in office, feeling that responsibility that we can't do the same and then expect a different outcome. And so if we are talking about, and we're not just talking about diversity and having different cultural groups and different sexual orientations or genders represented on mayor and council or even department heads, but that it really means like unlearning a lot of the racist, heterosexual, you can name all the isms, that we've been socialized with, unlearning that and being humble, having some humility to recognize the ways that we have been privileged from a lot of these systems and how it's worked for some and not for others. And so if we're really to have, a more fair, equitable society, we need to understand that history. And so I am, grateful for all my colleagues on the council who've been supportive of this equity office and recognizing that we have a lot of work to do, and especially you, city manager, for helping carry out that vision. And Larice, thank you for taking that leap of faith with us. I know that we're not always going to be on the same page and that you have a tricky job to navigate all the different, histories represented here at the table. And so I look forward to continuing to do this work because we have a lot of work to do, and that we might not feel or see the impacts of it till generations later. But it's important that we get started. I think, I think I lost my train of thought there, but just thanks again for my colleagues, Larice, city manager, for helping carry out this work. And I remember now, we had an open house, like a meet and greet with Larice a couple weeks ago at the office. And so thank you for making the time and listening to a lot of the concerns, in Ward 1 and what are some of the things that come up for people, and that we look forward to continuing that work.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Any others? Councilmember Dahl?
I am so proud to be part of this effort to the extent that I am. And I'm obviously a person who's lived with great privilege, but I've seen this inequity from grade school. And I'd like to consider myself an ally. This morning, I was watching in shock and awe the January 6th hearings. And those people with guns were racist bastards, dedicated to overthrowing our democracy for some image of white supremacy. So if anybody thinks that there's no need for the work that Larice and all of us are going to be doing, that's the biggest evidence to me that we need to do this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any others? Well, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to your continued work with us, Larice, and I would highly recommend to my colleagues on the council that haven't had the opportunity to meet with Larice, that you sit down, meet with her, talk through things of what the Office of Equity can do for us here in the city of Tucson, both internally and externally. We're looking forward to the team that you're building now. And I also want to reiterate my gratefulness to my colleagues on the council that have supported the creation of this office and this position, and to our city manager for helping us move the needle forward on this issue. Thank you, Larice, and we'll be talking soon.
Thank you.
Item 4, time has been set aside for the mayor and council to consider the fiscal year 2023 Economic and Workforce Development Selection Committee funding recommendations. Mr. Manager?
Mayor, members of the council, this is what I would call the semi-annual, I guess, or biannual review by the council of the economic development workforce grant funding. There is a process, as you saw in the materials. There's 9 members of the board that are appointed by mayor and council. I appoint one as well. And they make recommendations. What is before you is really an overview of that. There is no action on this item. This is, I believe, action item 7R under consent. So we would look for feedback and thoughts, and then the recommended action would take place as a part of the consent calendar. With that, I'll turn it over to Barbara Coffey, who is really leading the charge on and chairing the group. Barb.
Thank you, City Manager. Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor, members of council. The item, again, the recommendation for funding for the FY 23-24 Economic and Workforce Development and Special Events Grants. The Economic and Workforce Development Selection Committee met in May to review and score proposals. There were a total of 29 applications from nonprofit organizations, totaling more than $1.7 million in requests. This is a 2-year competitive grant cycle and included a total funding allocation of $750,000. That number includes an additional $150,000 of ARPA funds to supplement the traditional pool of funding. The RFP for Economic and Workforce Development solicited proposals in 3 primary focus areas: small business support and development, job training for at-risk adults and at-risk youth, and long-term job training. The RFP for special events solicited proposals for events that build community and enhance quality of life while developing the local economy and tourism industry. The committee was thoughtful and intentional in its approach to reviewing and scoring applications, keeping in mind funding guidance from prior years, and also balancing recommendations for funding organizations with proven track records, along with some organizations seeking support for new programs. The committee also valued proposals representing diversity in terms of targeted populations served in the workforce and small business categories, and in terms of ethnic and cultural features in the events category. The list of recommendations for funding are included in your agenda materials. So I want to point out this year we did have 2 committee members recuse themselves for conflicts. Elaine Becker recused herself from reviewing and voting on the recommendations of the workforce and small business categories, and Akani Oyegbola recused himself from reviewing and voting on the recommendations of the special events category. The committee also discussed in its comments reevaluating the program application for future grant cycles, making enhancements to the program to better align with our equity goals and to create a procedure in place to handle conflicts of interest up front. And I will say 2 members of the committee are also here today. Bobby Verena and Akani Oyegbola are in the audience. And also just a special thanks to staff Amanda Bruno and Irene Messina for the support they give to the committee for this process. With that, I'll turn it over to our Principal Assistant City Attorney, Regina Nasson, for further comments.
Is this the one I'm supposed to be at, or this one? Okay. Is it on? There we go. Mayor Romero, members of the council, thank you for allowing me to be here today. I think it's the first time I've had the opportunity to chat with you, so I appreciate being here. Some questions did come up regarding conflicts of interest in connection with the work of the committee to come up with recommendations for the mayor and council regarding these awards. It's my understanding that the 2 individuals who had conflicts declared those conflicts and recuse themselves from any participation in the discussion or decisions about how to allocate the pot of money that was allocated to the type of event or program that they were associated with. It's my understanding that both individuals also did not participate in deciding how to allocate the overall pot of money between those 2 programs and special event categories. That is legally appropriate and adequate. That complies with the Arizona revised statutes regarding conflicts of interest, as well as with the city's policies regarding conflicts of interest. As Barbara mentioned, going forward, it may be very appropriate to come up with a way to get the information up front from individuals who are serving on the committee to more quickly and upfront evaluate potential conflicts of interest so that those can be identified and evaluated upfront. And we in the City Attorney's Office are happy to assist with that process in any way we can.
Thank you, Ms. Nasson. Barbara, do you want to include anything else?
I think I have no further comments, but if there are questions, I'm happy to take those.
Absolutely. Any of my colleagues have any questions or comments on this item? Vice Mayor?
All right, so I guess I have a couple of questions. One of my concerns from the funding that it seemed that we tried to fund a lot of organizations with some funding rather than like having more of a priority and funding organizations closer to the amount that they requested. So it seems like if we're funding organizations at 10 or 20% of what they ask, like we're asking them to do a lot of reporting and a lot of work and not funding them for that amount to actually have a person do a lot of that work. So that was one of my concerns. Also, that we've come up with processes with ARPA and CARES dollars that we've been learning a lot from and trying, to center equity and making it more accessible for a lot of our community organizations to access these funds, and not seeming like we're using a similar system across the organization. So I'm curious about what types of questions did the committee ask about past recipients of grants? Why, like you had shared with our office specifically that one of our appointees was being unresponsive. Why weren't we made aware of that so we could have reached out to them or had somebody else in their place? And then was the committee aware of Mayor and Council's climate and sustainability goals? And how would we incorporate the expertise of the Office of Equity to make sure that we're creating a more robust grant distribution rubric?
Thank you, Mayor and Vice Mayor Santa Cruz. I appreciate your comments, and they have all been some shared concerns among committee members as well. To the first point you made about prioritizing funding closer to the request, it is always a challenge when we have the volume of requests and the amount of money. And I did some trending on this as well in terms of history. I recall the last grant cycle, we had 1.9 million in requests. The cycle before that, 1.2 million in requests. So it does always come down to when the pool of funding is 600,000, it is a tough review process. And we would love to fund everyone in their entirety. One of the things we do ask for, and applicants are asked to do this in their proposal, is to share their budget, their sources and uses of the funding, to ensure also that the City of Tucson is not the only funder of their program. We are looking for some positive outcomes, and so we want them to be successful. So we do look at how they leverage our dollars to then get other dollars, and they can describe that. And so most of them, of course, do a very good job of that. I can absolutely, 99%. Of those folks are answering those questions and understand that application process, but it does not mean that there could not be further prioritizing based on your direction. So I think that is part of the enhancement opportunity we have to go back as a committee and discuss alignment, such as you had just gone through with the ARPA process. So that is an opportunity. And then again, the concern about appointees, I think we all struggle with boards and commissions and having appointments, and then also their participation. I feel the same struggle with the Small Minority Women Business Commission. We've been trying to get appointees to that one to get a quorum to meet that body. I think we've been fortunate. We've had some longtime members on this commission, this committee, but it is, there are new council members at the table. There's new opportunities for participation, and I do know that there was at least one or two members that had some particular struggles this year that is not the common situation. And as for climate and sustainability goals, I probably would defer to the city manager on that one and how we can incorporate.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, I think the conversation on this is, and if I can summarize your question, it's really the incorporation of mayor and council policies and the assurance of those policies as we're looking, whatever the source is for funding agencies and ensuring that. And I think that's part of the effort that Luis will help us with. You just heard some of those discussions. But I also think that we can provide better guidance up front as these discussions are happening. I think we did a great job with the ARPA and CARES money and implementing the council, the mayor and council's direction and just framework. And I think we have some areas that we can do that as well, particularly with this area.
You know, I just wanted to include in terms of what I think about this particular item, workforce development and economic and workforce development grants. The history of how we created this pot of money for this was when Trio at the time, now Sun Corridor, said, you know, we're not going to take any funds from the different cities and towns, the jurisdictions. They left $500,000 at the table. And I was a council member at the time, and I begged and pleaded my colleagues on the council that instead of putting this $500,000 back into the general fund, that we create the economic and workforce development pot. So I was here when it was created, and what we wanted to do when this pot of money was created is that we would seed the continued investment in small businesses and be able to create, help not just startup businesses, but continue helping them thrive in the city of Tucson, both in the small business sector, but also in the possibility of being, seeing continued investment in the startup economy, in innovation, and what was coming out of the University of Arizona in tech. And then part, in terms of the special events, was that we would create a support system as a city to organizations that created special events that attract not just Tucsonans, but attract people into the city of Tucson, right? Because our arts and culture are part of our economy. So I guess all this to say that I think it is a missed opportunity if we don't continue digging in, especially with what is our organic economy, of what we can do with our special events and our small business development. And what we have to request and require from the organizations that we're investing in as well is the recognition that the city of Tucson is their partner. Too many times I've seen some of these special events, not even one mention that the city of Tucson is their partner, not one logo, not one mention. And so I would love to be able to make sure that all of these special events give recognition to the general funds being used and the ARPA funds being used for their events. So I too believe that we should take a look at what we're investing in with an equity lens, making sure that many of these organizations have, you know, the idea was seeding them and helping them find their way into additional funding. What are we not giving an opportunity to? What are we not seeing here that needs investment? For example, Juneteenth. For example, the Tucson Mariachi, the flowers and bullet, all, what are the special events that we are not seating that need a seed of investment from the city of Tucson. So I love the idea of being able to kind of look at the process, look at who we're not reaching, invite them to apply, and look at the process that we use next year. I was personally very concerned that my representative on the selection committee had to recuse herself from several or from some of the part of this. I'm going to have to evaluate, right? Is this person the right person for this particular committee? And so I invite you all to also do the same. And I would encourage the Office of Economic Initiatives just to let us know, hey, your person is not showing up, we don't have a quorum for these meetings. If you want to vote at the table, make sure that you're either encouraging your appointee to show up or appoint someone else that will represent your office. So that's my 2 cents in terms of this process, and I'm looking forward to some continued change in how we do business. Councilmember Cunningham.
Just a few things, and it's all good. I think one is that we're fooling ourselves on the idea that $750,000 is going to make that much of an impact. That's the first thing. And while I know why the money is where it is, and it's for a really, really good reason, and it may have to go back to that level. But we may have a bonus cycle next year where we can do a little more. That's one piece. I think the other piece is I thought about a couple of the proposals that we put through on ARPA. And it's interesting that we had a couple ARPA proposals that probably would have been competitive in this, and we weren't able to get that application for the ARPA over into this application and into this discussion pool. And I can think of one right off the top of my head, Tucson buckets, that might have been perfect for, this kind of opportunity. So if it's okay, all of the awardees are well-deserved, and we have I have faith in the system we have. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm saying, hey, that we've got some opportunity here, and there'd be some value to augmenting it, is what I'm trying to get to. The last piece is, I'd love to have, we've talked about this in the past, and I think that's one of the things that happened with well, it didn't really happen here. So every single past recipient that's on this list got money. And the only ones who got turned down were people who hadn't gotten money in the past. And we have one company who's a great company. Like, I'm not even kidding. They've got a great mission. They're a great company, but they've gotten money 6 years in a row. And we as a council had specifically said in the past, there's only one entity that we were willing to do that for, which was JobPath, for very specific reasons. And so we kind of want to look at bringing in new blood every few years in this process. So that's another piece of this. I'm not saying that who got money didn't deserve it or anything like that. I'm saying that we philosophically, I remember having that conversation. Like when we get a new group, we look at it. And so I don't want to change anything at the table. I don't want to make any promises to fund programs that didn't get funded. I don't think that's appropriate because then we completely disrupt the entire process. I will say this though. There are maybe some programs that are as a microcosm that can be a little more ward specific, where some of these entities have a second bite at the apple to get partially funded to apply to some of the unclaimed ARPA or community funding that the ward offices have. The other piece I'd say is the ones who did get awarded money and didn't get as much as they needed have another bite at the apple, and they can work with the ward offices. So I'll leave it there. I know every year this is a bit of a challenge, and I think there's value to all of these programs, but again, I'm looking at a couple of them, and there's like a new one that I thought that really caught my eye when we were going through the process, and I was kind of watching it, and it only got 20% of its funding. So I'm kind of like, hey, what can we do on that, especially considering that when it comes to Tucson Clean and Beautiful, they're our partner on so many other things. So they probably shouldn't have even been applying for this grant. They should have been like probably rolling it into 2 or 3 of the other programs they're already doing with us. So that's kind of one of the pieces that jumps off of me. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Councilmember Dahl, and then the Vice Mayor. And I don't know if my other colleagues have their hands up.
Thank you, Mayor. Short comment and then a question. Next year, I'd like to be more involved in the process. This is my first year. And for instance, seeing all the applications in advance and have a better understanding of this. We're the ones who are approving this, and we get this information kind of late at the end, and it's really hard to maneuver. And frankly, they all are good organizations, but it doesn't reflect my priorities, the priorities of my ward. But I'm going to go along this year. I was confused in the agenda, and I think it's not this item, but the item in consent that has to do with this. At one point, there was a recommendation to increase the size of the commission, and then it seems to have been pulled. I was curious about that.
Mayor, Councilmember Durham, that was a typo. That it was just intended to extend, not expand, extend the date. And so I apologize, we used expand. It was not intended to expand it.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks for calling me Councilmember Durham. You're not the only one who does that. I love it.
So there was a comment and a question. Okay. Any of my colleagues that are virtual with us today? Okay, I don't hear them.
I'm good, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember. Mr. Ortega?
Mayor, I know, I think Vice Mayor wants to make some comments. Before you do that, just a couple of thoughts. I think it's important that, well, 2 things. One, this is a 2-year funding cycle. And so if you want to have a conversation about this, it's really 2 years from now. One of the things we could do, and that's what I was trying to whisper in these folks' ears, is we could come back to you with a 1-year recommendation and then have a conversation about this again next year. I think it could work that way, keeping in mind that the application from these said 2 years, so there's an expectation there. So we'd have to go back and at least let them know that it would be a 1 year. The other piece to it that I think is important is, and by the way, Mayor, thank you for the history. I did not know that, and I appreciate you letting us know. Just by definition, seed does not mean continued funding year after year, with maybe the exception of Job Path. So I think that could be a conversation that we have with regard to, I hate to use the word limit, but certainly focus on the new type of investment that's out there with the framework that Mayor and Council have given us. So just a couple thoughts. And again, there's no action on this item here. It's going to be 7R. And maybe between now and then, we can have a conversation about what that could look like for a 1-year guidance, and then maybe coming back with some thoughts down the road.
I like that idea. Also, one of the conversations that we've had at this table before when it comes to workforce and economic development is that Job Path be its own program. And I think that Barbara and I have talked about this as well, and then add more. So remove it from the $750,000 that we put here so that it could be on top of, right? So $200,000 in funding for Job Path, which we all have seen how valuable that program is, plus the $750,000 on top of that.
Yeah, and to Job Path's credit, over the last 3 years, they've leveraged that money.
Incredibly, yeah.
I mean, they've done a pretty amazing job. We kind of challenged them a few years ago and said, hey, you got to diversify a little bit, and they responded. I think they're serving more community members than they ever have. So I think that's like the paragon of success, or the pathway to success. So I think we're kind of, I love that we have our process, and we have a good process, and I think everybody's trying. But whenever you have this, and especially when you're coming out of COVID, everything's remote, everything, there's certain stuff that's going to be lost in translation. I'm sure we're going to be on track next year. It's just, let's kind of keep those things on the, kind of keep those things in our back pocket, especially newer programs, taking a look at augmenting augmenting the allotment. And then the last but not least, certainly not least, is if we already have an entity that already has a community partnership with us and a contract with us, why are you applying for a grant? You might as well come and just negotiate with us straight up and go, oh, okay, and we can kind of work out what we can do there. So those are some pieces. That's all.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So just some comments back to what you were saying. I think it's important, especially this happens every 2 years, and you do, so much has happened. I can't believe it was 2020 last time we voted on this, that I feel like we do give feedback. And so I'm not necessarily feeling like it gets incorporated. So I do want to give some direction and then something come back to mayor and council from there. The other thing, I think when we're funding these organizations, these community partners, I still see it as an extension of the work that the city is doing. So it shouldn't just be like, here, you got funded, be well, but as like, how are we continuing to work together as folks are coming to us with their needs? We're like, oh yeah, the city funds X program. Let me set you up with the person there and they'll help you out. That it's not they're doing work over there, we're doing work over here, that it's all connected and it's a partnership. And thank you again for bringing up the information about the seed money. I think going back to if this is happening every 2 years, that I think it's helpful for EI to come back to mayor and council offices and be like, this was your appointee 2 years ago. Is this still the right person? We're about to, start reaching out and setting up meetings, and we just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. That would be helpful. So with that, I would like to give the following direction in the form of a motion for next year's process or next cycle's process, that for consistency in how we do business, I'd like to see the framework that we use for our ARPA grants adapted for this grant process in consultation with the Office of Equity, that we have an equity tool be employed to make sure that money is going to those with the greatest needs and greatest impact in underserved communities. When we are funding these applicants, it should be at a level that creates greater capacity for them. Each ward will have an appointee serve on the committee for the duration of its service and should be notified if their appointee is unable to serve. And additionally, I would like us to recognize that these grants offer an opportunity to deepen our community partnerships and refer grantees to community organizations that can offer help with technical assistance, training, or other services that make the grant more impactful.
That's a motion. There's a motion, a couple of seconds. Any further discussion? Mr. Ortega.
Mayor, just a point of clarification. Vice Mayor, your motion was specific for the next cycle, so we will just go through this exercise this evening. But you also suggested in the commentary about the reappointment of members. That is part of the item that's on the agenda for this evening, 7R. So you could separate those out and not vote on the reappointment of members or the extension of that, pending more conversation amongst yourselves or, with your respective representatives. I think that would be fine too. I just wanted to make sure that you gave me that clarification.
And I do see Ms. Nassen at the mic.
I just wanted to clarify that, that this afternoon, the action will be to extend the life, to approve the allocations, and also to extend the life of the committee. You are not technically appointing or reappointing members at this time. It would simply survive in its existing configuration for a while. One of the recommendations that I think really dovetails with what a lot of folks have been saying today, you may want to think about doing new appointments when you get a little bit closer to the next cycle so that you can more easily evaluate the ability of folks to serve and what their current affiliations are at that time, so you can recognize conflicts of interest. I did not mean to certainly contradict the city manager in any way. I just wanted to give that little point of clarification. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's even better. Any other questions, comments? Okay.
I just thought of one other thing. I mean, look, we talked about the double recusals. I'm sorry. We've got to figure out, if we're being transparent and we're putting our faith in folks, then we need to be able to say there's no recusals. I mean, I don't, Mike, I don't know what the law says. I obviously don't want to go against that. But is there a way that we can, as long as the person's disclosing what the conflict is, aren't they allowed to vote on this stuff, or how does that work?
So, Madam Mayor, members of council, Councilmember Cunningham, one of the reasons for the suggestion that Regina made about early disclosure of potential conflicts of interest is it because it matters what the nature of the potential conflict is. Some are just clear-cut, mandatory, you cannot participate in a decision or the discussion of the decision. So, for example, if you have a direct monetary interest in the outcome of a decision. Others are maybe perceived conflicts, but not legal conflicts, and those can be addressed in different ways. There is a provision in the conflicts law that provides that if the recusal of members of a voting body are required by conflicts are going to defeat the ability of that body to actually act, then you can declare the conflicts and move forward, and those persons can, in fact, participate in the decision. But it just emphasizes the need for us getting the information up front so that we can identify, is that really a conflict? Is it a disqualifying conflict or not? And then we'll do as the Vice Mayor suggested, you notify the council office because you might want to put someone else in there so they can participate fully on the committee.
And that's all I'm saying. I think transparency is the number one goal there, and I think that's the biggest piece. And saying, hey, I declare a conflict, which I don't think happened here. I think everything was out in the open, but saying, oh, I'm conflict, I'm recused on this. I'd rather the person say, I just want everybody to know that I might need to recuse myself because blah, blah, blah. I mean, I want that transparency. I want it to be totally wide open. And I think you're acting in better faith if you do get to vote on it. So in some cases, obviously the absolute refusals apply. But anyway, I just was curious about that. Sorry to prolong the item.
Also wanted to clarify, Mr. Manager, you mentioned that we should do funding for 1 year, reevaluate and review the process, and then come back next year? Is that what you were recommending?
No, Mayor, I wasn't necessarily recommending. What I was suggesting is, given the conversation, that that's an option. The way that the Vice Mayor's motion read, it's the next cycle.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure you were clear that the next cycle would be 2 years. Now, given what the Attorney Nassen went over, I think that also gives you an opportunity to have conversation between now and that in terms of the appointment of members. I was concerned as I read it says term of, but it's the committee, not of the members.
Okay.
So it gives you an opportunity to reappoint folks that are consistent with your policies.
Okay. I feel comfortable either way. I don't know what my colleagues would want to do, review it again in a year or leave it as a 2-year cycle.
Your Honor, I think the grantees applied as a 2-year
Or
cycle.
2-year cycle?
I
Okay.
just, when you try to change things up, you're compromising your transparency.
Okay.
We can't do that.
Well, the process has to be fair, and so
Said they were going to get 2 years. They got their 2 years. They got their awards. We need to follow through on that.
okay. Vice Mayor, comfortable? All righty, so any other comments? If not, all those in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any against?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you so much, Ms. Coffey. Really appreciate your work, and I look forward to continue our work on this.
Thanks, Barbara.
What I'm going to do right now is take a little bit of a break, maybe a 5-minute break, and we can see each other here in the next 3:35. aside for mayor and council to review and provide direction on the expired eviction moratorium. Mr. Manager.
Mayor, this is an item where we are looking for direction. It is for basically lifting the moratorium. I'll let Liz Morales go into detail. This is something that's been around for some time, pre-pandemic. Some of the first conversations we had as the pandemic was taking hold was eviction moratorium. So with that, I'll turn it over to Liz Morales, our housing director. Liz?
Thank you, Mr. Manager, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. Thank you for this opportunity to provide an update on the work that we've been doing around public housing and providing that eviction moratorium during a very, very difficult time. Just as a reminder, the public housing, we have about 1,505 units and households. Our program is subsidized by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, otherwise known as HUD. The families and individuals that live in our public housing are our tenants, are the city's tenants, our residents. And so we have a high responsibility to them to provide them safe, decent, and affordable housing. One of the great things about this program is they pay the rent based on their income. So when they come in, we do a rent determination and indicate to them what their rental amount is. Should there be any changes of income, especially loss of income, we can immediately make changes to their rental portions, so that way they're paying in accordance to what their household is receiving. This program is heavily mandated and regulated by HUD. We are reviewed regularly around for many things, but I highlight 4 areas. One is our vacancy rate. The second is rent collection. Third is the quality of our properties and our units. And so there's regular inspections that are done of not just the units, but the whole property. And also the time it takes us to turn units, also the time it takes us to bring units back online if we have to take them offline to do any significant rehabilitation. So we meet regularly with our HUD reps. Recently, one of the indicators that has not been an issue in the past, but it's not unusual right now with public housing authorities, is around rent collection. We're being told that this is a concern, and what steps are we taking to ensure that we are collecting rent? And so I just want to share that as in that these are the reasons we're here today, is to talk about lifting the eviction moratorium. And I will ask for the PowerPoint presentation, please. Okay, thank you. And as that comes up, so with the eviction moratorium, what we have done is, and as we've indicated in the past, as people have not been paying rent, we have continued to reach out to them just to give them courtesy notices, ask them how we can assist them. We've been very fortunate in that many of those households, we've been able to connect them to the emergency rental assistance program. If they were, there wasn't loss of income, but they had other issues that caused them to not be able to pay their rent. But as I've indicated, if we did determine a loss of income, we made those changes. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Yeah. So going into talking about those residents that are affected, we made a preliminary determination that through May, we had approximately 190 residents, and that did not pay rent between April 2020 through May 2022. Does not necessarily mean that they didn't pay all those months, but some portion of those months. We know that at least 112 out of the 190 owe more than 1,000. And yeah, next slide, please. And the average of those late payments or the amounts owed is around $1,200. It does vary from family to family. During that time, from April 2020 to May 2022, there were no late fees applied. So this is just strictly rent that is due. And so we know the amount is in the neighborhood of $135,000 that's owed by the residents. Next slide. And should mayor and council decide to lift the moratorium, I wanted to provide in the next slide just a quick understanding of how we approach working with these families, communicating with them, offering support. We know that there's still funding for ERAP, and we even have spoken to CIC that is nearing the exit of their contract. They have administrative funds that they're willing to put back into direct assistance, and so we have funds if we need to assist our residents, and we will work with them to assist each and every one of them. If for some reason they're ineligible, which is very rare, then we can work with very easy payment plans for the residents if that's the direction we're given. As for a recommendation today, we are recommending lifting the moratorium on August 1st. We would not start evicting August 1st. What we would do is use that time for education. Those residents who fail to pay rent as of August 1st, just those first time, missed a payment, we'll start serving notices as our plan document states. HUD requires us to set our policies and procedures, so we have to follow our policies and procedures. But we will work with residents, again, with payment plans or assistance to apply for emergency rental assistance. As far as timeline, to help residents understand, the whole month of August is about, again, education, offering assistance. In September, around the 6th to the 10th, we will start sending out our first notice. We'll use most of the September, again, attempting to contact residents. Should we still have non-responsive people, starting September 20th, we'll start issuing notices. That gives us nearly 2 months to really make an effort, again, to engage and also, again, connect them to housing assistance. We will not do any evictions for anyone that's working with us or communicating with us. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm ready to accept any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Morales, for your presentation. This is a hard one because what we've been doing for the last 2 years is advocating for eviction moratorium within our own public housing units. And so it seems counterintuitive and counterproductive for us to lift the moratorium, even though the federal government has lifted theirs. But can you explain further as to why you think this step is appropriate for the City of Tucson and Mayor and Council to go along with lifting the moratorium?
Yes. So for one, we have a lot of residents who are paying rent. And so for me, it's really an issue of fairness to ensure that we're holding everyone to the same level of accountability. Second, those rents are critical for our operations. For us to maintain units, rehab units, the rent revenue is a significant source for us to ensure that we can maintain those units. And then third is just compliance with HUD. I'm super concerned that if we continue the moratorium, that could jeopardize the work that we're doing with HUD and put us in kind of under a spotlight. And so we need to follow what we call the admissions continuing occupancy plan, which is our policy document, which does not allow for moratoriums unless it comes down from the federal government.
What would be at stake? Are there any funds at stake from HUD if we don't comply with the percentages that HUD wants us to comply with in terms of people paying rent?
So I can't put a direct connection to funding. However, again, when HUD looks at the funding we receive, there's 3 pots of money that we get. We receive a operating subsidy, the capital improvement funding, and then the rent revenue. So HUD will not cover us for loss of rent revenue. So then the whole program is in jeopardy. And so our budgets definitely need that rent revenue to be effective. And again, HUD does look at that and will challenge us as to how we're not making our part to ensure that the rent is collected. So I don't know that it can be directly connected to funding, but it is our funding source.
Okay.
Is the rent revenue.
So is there a certain percentage of renters that need to be paying rent in order for us to be able to be compliant with HUD?
Yes, HUD does expect that we would collect at least 98% of rent.
98.
So we're at around 70%.
Okay.
79%. So
Okay.
we need to bring those numbers up.
Okay. Talk to us a little bit more about the timeline that you're expecting to help these 112 or 190 people that fall into this category. What's your timeline that you're looking at? You said that August you will be looking at educational so that everyone understands that the moratorium has been lifted and they need to pay their rent. Then what? What happens after that?
So as we connect with the households, if they are open to receiving assistance from either the ERAP program, or they say, well, I'll just do a payment plan, we'll engage in that.
Okay.
The great thing with this program is we will always work with the residents. So if it's not in August, let's say we have families who can pay in August, but they find in October they're in a situation, we're always in a position where we can help and assist. That's the beauty of the program. The rent collection is very important, but HUD does recognize that we work with low-income families, so we are flexible. The idea of August is around education, connecting them to services and assistance. Again, part of the concern from my point of view is residents may have been apprehensive to reach out to us during this period of time. If the more we can show that we're willing to work with them, the easier it is. And I will say, we have amazing residents who are very good at that. It's just the handful, I say handful, a small number out of 1,500 residents that, for whatever reason, are not communicating with us. And this will give us the opportunity to show that we want to work with them, but if they don't, there are consequences.
So they just haven't communicated in the last 2 years, or?
Yes, they haven't responded to our request to, how can we work with you?
Yeah.
What are your issues? And so this will allow us to use this mechanism of following our ACOP to ensure that they are following their lease.
Okay, so after we lift the moratorium, is there a particular, you're going to continue working? Do you have a particular timeline that HUD is requesting that we up the amount of percentage of people paying their rent?
So HUD's asking us every month. So
Okay.
what we want to do is show progress.
Okay.
So as long as, and HUD has recognized that this is a national problem, but they continue, just like on our Housing Choice Voucher Program, ask us how can we continue to make headway. And so if we can show progress that we're increasing the rent collection, that is what would do well for us with our HUD partner.
So you talked about ERAP as being one of the emergency assistance rent or eviction prevention program, which, by the way, the city of Tucson has done an incredible job doling out more than, I think, $50 million for city of Tucson residents that where we're helping prevent eviction. What if they don't qualify for that? What other types of funds can be used for help for these residents?
So
They are
yes.
willing to work with us and talk to us.
So Pima Community Action Agency has multiple funding sources. Eviction rental assistance, the ERAP program is one of those. So we, if there's, again, I think it's very rare to find someone who doesn't qualify. I think all our residents would qualify based on income, based on the rules of the ERAP program that did change over time. Initially, there was a COVID nexus requirement
Yeah.
that is no longer there.
Okay.
So it should make making people qualify very easy.
And then finally, for me, I know my colleagues have questions or comments. What are the additional wraparound services that residents can tap into for assistance? In other words, maybe there are some residents, elderly residents, or there's mental or behavioral issues that, for one reason or the other, they're not connecting to, to the city of Tucson program. So, are we in the business of actually trying to help with other wraparound services for assistance?
Mayor, that's a very good question. Many don't realize we have what we call resident coordinator. For our public housing, we've added an additional person at Tucson House, but we do have property management staff are a great resource, but they also know when someone needs additional supports. We also have the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, which really helps connect people who want to, rebuild and move eventually off of public assistance. But we have the resources and the services, and with our nonprofit agencies, we work with Compass at Tucson House, as an example, is one of the nonprofits. ASU's
social work program has been a great resource for our public housing residents. So we definitely have the ability to connect people to mainstream benefits, workforce development, those type of resources as people are looking education to extend their education. So.
Thank you, Liz. Any questions, comments? Vice Mayor, Councilmember Cunningham.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Liz, for the presentation. I was curious about the number of residents, that are affected, including those that have been paying versus those that have been missing in action. I think when we spoke of the 190, even those were still paying something, but that there were some. So what's that number?
So I have to say that the reporting, we did work on some of that. So what we can say is that the vast majority do communicate. We don't have an exact number of the total MIA, totally not communicating, that we couldn't get down to that granular level, but we will work on those numbers to identify which ones those are. Property management staff, no. They were in a training this week, so unfortunately we couldn't get to those reports. But we can say that of those who are just not communicating, they're a very small number. Most of them that have debts owed have said, we'll work with you. Maybe they have, maybe they haven't followed through, but this will give them kind of the little push that they need to follow through and put in their application or agree to a payment plan. That's all we're asking for at this point.
I think with that, sometimes, the calls that we get to our office are from maybe staff that are working more closely with residents who maybe aren't so empathetic or sensitive to people's, whatever issues or needs they have at the time. So I think it'd be important to have some consistency in that and not make people, feel like, yeah, you didn't do certain things, so you're out. So I think that's going to be important. For the $135,000 that is owed in back rent, how do we intend to pay for that?
Right. So I believe we can get a good majority of that through the ERAP program is my hope. If we're going to make a big push to really get a major application and one like major application to CIC to utilize the remaining funds that they have. I do believe some will want to do a payment agreement, and so some of that may come from the tenants themselves, maybe wanting to pay some of that back. There is some incentive as well. As many of you know, when we do our Board of Commissioners meeting, we do write-offs. Those write-offs actually go on a U.S. Department of Housing website. So if someone wants to go to another community or come back to public housing, if they leave, it's really important that they don't have any debts owed. So the goal to use ERAP, I think, is the best way to really help get them in a good position so that they can stay successful.
So I know that with ERAP in the past, landlords were allowed to apply for that funding and kind of not put that burden on the renters. Is that something that we can do without having to wait, to hear from them?
Yes, so our goal is to do it on behalf of the tenants. We'll still want them to be agreeable to that, just to ensure that we're doing it in the way that the ERAP program is intended. But we can do the work for the tenant so that all they need to do probably is come in and sign an application.
So after that time frame that you kind of outlined for us, and you get to the point of needing to do an eviction, what happens? What happens then? And are they again not allowed to come back and apply for housing from the city again?
So the process, again, for failure to respond, failure to work with us, what we'll do is we serve a 14-day non-payment of rent notice. They have that period to resolve it. If after 40 days, it really goes to the first of the following month. So literally, they have almost 30 days to communicate, pay the rent, do what they need to do. If by the first of that following month, our city attorney's office will file in court. If that judgment is upheld, we have to wait 5 days before we can file for a writ of restitution.
And then that writ of restitution takes up a day or 2 or 3. Again, all the way through up to that point, we can work with those clients. But again, we really want to get them before we get to eviction because we don't want that on their record. So our goal, we have a full 30 days of engaging, calling them, knocking on the door to avoid that. And we really, even prior to the pandemic, we had very few non-payment evictions because of how we operate. That's never been a major reason for evictions for us.
Okay, my final question, so how are we making city housing residents aware that this change is coming or that it's been implemented? Like, what's the grace period for them?
Yeah, so I've directed staff, we're not going to take any action until at least mid-September, if after much activity. So we're going to use all our staff, all our resources. We'll put things in writing, we'll make phone calls, we'll knock on doors. The goal is, and property management staff know their residents really well. So it's again about building relationship, building trust, and using some of our staff that are more good with social service type communication to reach out to the ones who may be we're having difficulty with. So we're going to use every tool in the box to try to communicate both in English and Spanish. We have other residents of other languages. We use interpretation services so we can make sure we communicate so they know what the ramifications are should they not pay their rent.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Cunningham and then Councilmember Fimbres.
Just some easy ones for you, and I think I understand why you're coming to us for this. I don't think it's actually our druthers to be saying, oh, gee whiz, we need to start. I don't think we're going to go out there saying, oh, we have to evict all these people. I don't think that's the intention here. I think one is we've got to come into compliance or we risk our entire program. The other piece is that we're going to meet people where they are on this. That's the insurance I think you're giving us. So I have a couple pieces. One is, do we have anybody pending eviction, not because of payment, but because of the condition in which they're treating the property? Do we have any issues of that where it's a disruption problem?
So you're talking about, I think, and Mayor, Councilmember Cunningham, I think you're asking about health and safety. If someone,
Yes.
So, we do have individuals or families sometimes with significant damages, or they've done something to cause plumbing issues. We will always fix that. Some of those we do if it's very much a tenant caused in a negligent way, like and it's clear that it was negligent, we will put that on their bill. Again, they don't have to pay it the next month. It's part of what's owed. When we have health and safety, hoarding, or other very serious issues, the state actually and our policy requires that we address that because that's an emergency situation. We don't have those very often.
Okay. My next question is, do we have anywhere it's not necessarily a health and safety issue, it is a disruption to other tenants issue?
Councilmember Cunningham, we have dealt with issues of not as much, violent activity, criminal activity, serious repeated violations of the lease in which we've attempted to address it and hope that they correct it and they continue to do it where they're putting the health and safety of other people. So we do, again, we evict very rarely, but we have had to take those type of actions.
Okay, and this 190, I'm trying to figure this out. So we have 190 out of how many units that are owned by the city?
1,500.
And that's putting us at 79%?
Yes.
Because that number isn't adding up all the way, right?
But it does, because it takes us sometimes 30, 60 days to get some of those funds. So not everyone's paying right on the first of the month. The 190 is like the progressive over a large amount of
And
time.
how many folks in our estimation of these 190 are really working in good faith? I mean, they're trying.
So at this point, those are the ones that we think for the most part, they're not either following through or they're not communicating with us. So we really tried to narrow it down to the ones that were a little more excessive, even though some of them, their dollar amounts are below 1,000, but their payment amounts might be $20 a month, you know?
Okay.
And so
Okay.
it's about just trying to get them to be consistent and or communicate when.
I was about to ask, so if somebody, because we have some people who have a partial of like 300 a month, right? So if they're even 2 months behind, it's almost not, they're coming up on $900. But then we have other folks that have a partial of $50 a month, and they haven't talked to us in 20 months. That's a big problem. So I'm just trying to get a gauge of what it is. Look, I guess my last piece, this is probably the most important piece just for me, and there's no policy about it. How are we gonna if we do end up having to evict somebody, if the bottom falls out of the boat and we have to evict somebody and they got kids, I'm not putting any kids out on the street. So I just wanna know if we have a locked up contingency for that. That's my last piece, and I'll be supportive of this, but please assure me about what we're gonna do in that contingency.
Mayor, Councilmember Cunningham, I can assure you that that is, again, we also don't want to do that. And so we will take every step we can to address it through either ERAP assistance or some other type of assistance so that we don't have to put any families out.
And we can go to other parts of our system. We have other continuums in our system, maybe not Wildcat Inn, but other continuums in our system and contingencies. But I don't want to put any kids on the street. So that's my big thing on this one. If it's an issue with the parents being negligent, then that's an issue for the state. But at the end of the day, we're not going to put any kids on the street. That's the only thing I ask, and I will support this.
Thank you.
Likewise, I mean, seniors, you know, families. And if there are other continuums, like Councilmember Cunningham said, Wildcat Inn, other options for individuals or families, then we should get them there. Councilmember Fimbres.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, I want to thank Liz Morales and her HCD for their work and Housing First and for the city to produce more affordable housing for those in need. But I think the perception is going to be, we're going to hit with the perception. Liz, of the 190 listed in the communication, how many of those have still lost their income? Do we know yet?
Mayor, Councilmember Fimbres, I don't have a hard number. I will say my expectation is that they haven't lost their income because the majority of our residents that lose income quickly come to report it so we can adjust their rental amount. So until we can really sit down and talk to them, find out what are the challenges or if there's anything that's affected them, a change of income, a change of household member, but we don't have the hard numbers as to know if any of them had any loss of income. If they did, we can make those adjustments.
Do you have the staff to make those adjustments ready now?
Yes, we have
Are you
adequate.
still hiring?
No, we are just brought on 3 new property managers, new assistant property managers. We are staffed to be able to do this.
The question I have is, we just pushed back the bus fares to December 31st. Can we wait on this till December 31st? Then move on it with a 2 months window that we're talking about and give enough people ample time to see what they can do?
Mayor, Councilman Fimbres, I would not recommend that we push it back any further. Again, by the time we do implement this, we will be well into the fall with this effort to make sure people get on track. If we wait till December, that'll push us into the new year with really trying to engage residents.
And you said HUD is the one hitting us up about this?
Yes, Councilmember Fimbres, HUD has alerted us that our collection rate is very low and is asking what actions are we taking to improve that.
Thank you, Liz. The perception's gonna be terrible for us. Everybody's rent's going up. We hear that the food is costing more, gasoline's costing more. It's not the right time, I don't think, for this. Thank you, Liz.
Any others? Councilmember Kozachik?
Thanks. First of all, I appreciate all the sensitivity that everyone around the table is, and you are given to this. And it's important to point out that Liz's department is not in the business of evicting people. It's just the reverse of that, and you guys do a great job. And the way that you allocated the ERAP money was so effective and efficient that we got more of it. And so it really shows the the heart and the soul of your department, your staff, and and you as well as a department leader. Can you speak just a little bit more about the payment plans that are available to people? Are they based on a sliding scale of income? I know the rents are, but speak to that a little bit. If I came up to you and said, I'm working half-time instead of full-time now, what would happen?
So, thank you, Mayor, Councilmember Kozachik. Our ACOP also outlines what payment arrangements looks like, and what it states is typically what we request is that they pay 30% down and then make payments that they can afford. So it could be $20 a month, it could be $30 a month. But what I've directed staff is that 30% down will be waived if that is too much for the family. So we will accept any down payment that they can indicate that they can afford, and we'll set the payment plan at a level that they feel that they can do. It doesn't do us any good to create a payment plan that is outside of their ability to meet.
So the point is that what we're doing is we're really just telling people work with us.
Yes.
And we'll work with you. But that's the bottom line on this thing.
Exactly.
Cool, thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, we need a motion to proceed with the city manager's recommendation.
I'll make that motion, Your Honor.
There's a motion and a second.
Second.
Couple of seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
No.
One opposed. So motion passes. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Ms. Morales. We move on to the next item, which is state and national legislative updates. Are there any state and national legislative and regional committee issues for discussion?
I do, yes.
Alrighty, thank you. Hi, Mr. Greenhill, how are you?
I'm well, thank you, Mayor. Honorable Mayor, members of the council, I distributed a federal and state updates through the IGR update on Friday, as well as in responses to questions from Council Member Fimbres. I do want to touch on actually a couple of housing issues, and then just some information about elections, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. First off, as was included in one of Councilmember Fimbres's questions, there has been some money made available by the Housing and Urban Development Department of the federal government, about $365 million to help move people from houselessness to homes and providing services for them. There's an application deadline of October 20th. I've talked actually with Director Morales about this, and the consortium of care in our area, the Tucson Planning Council for Homelessness, they will be applying for those funds and working, of course, with HCD on that. So wanted to make sure Mayor and Council knew about that. And then at the state level, I know you remember that there was a bill this session. It was House Bill 2674. This was the bill that aimed to remove the authorities for mayors and councils from approving single-family residential projects in the name of affordable housing. That bill was defeated, but what happened to that bill is that it became a study committee. And so I just want to make sure Mayor and Council know that the bill did, in the end, pass. It formed a legislatively approved Housing Supply Study Committee. It's got stakeholders on that committee from across the state. One of the members, by the way, is our fellow Mayor Woods of Tempe. He'll be on the committee, as well as other stakeholders. The League of Cities will be having a work group that has invited other cities to work with them to help provide information and data to the committee. And again, Director Morales and her staff will be helping with that as well. They will be having hearings and meetings through the summer and fall. They do plan on having a meeting in Tucson, I believe in September. They haven't announced the date yet, but they do aim to go across the state and take in information. They say their mission or their charge is to look at some of the causes for the need for additional housing supply, as well as what might be some of the solutions that the next legislature can take up. So when that September date for a Tucson hearing is set, I will make sure Mayor and Council have that information. And then with that, now that we've finished this last legislative session, we're now in election season, as you can see from all the signs around town. I just want to make sure some of the dates, important dates that are in front of us. The June 22nd is the last day to ask for an early ballot. And of course, the primary itself is August 2nd. The voter registration deadline for the primary election in November is October 11th. So if you're not registered and want to vote in the general election, that is the final day to register. And then, of course, the general election is November 8th. With the redistricting from the Independent Redistricting Committee, there are new districts across the state, including in the Tucson area. So there are new districts, new candidates representing different areas, and so important to check and see who might be the candidates in your new legislative district. And with that, if you don't mind, Mayor, I just would want to say there are a number of legislators who represented the Tucson area for many years who will not be running for re-election this year, and I'm especially thankful to Representative D'Alessandro and Hernandez, Representative Powers Hanley and DeGrazia, Senator Steele and Senator Otondo. Many of them, again, represented areas in and around Tucson for many, many years, fought on our behalf constantly year after year on important issues for us, and grateful for their, for their leadership, and thank them as they move on. And of course, we'll be working with the new crop of legislators as they get elected to make sure that they are that they understand our issues and values as we get ready for the next legislative session. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Randy Freeze is one of those as well, correct?
Randy, yes, and he wasn't there this last session, but yes, he was the last. He was elected 2 years ago for Legislative District 9, resigned, and Representative Mathis took his place. Representative Mathis will be running for re-election in that. Again, it's a different district, but representing that same area. But yes, Representative Freeze as well.
And usually after the elections and the dust is settled as to who's going to represent Tucson in the state legislature, Mr. Greenhills puts together a gathering with those that represent Tucson and Southern Arizona, with our legislative action plan and legislative priorities, and we have a sit down that usually I help lead, invite the council offices, and then just talk about, these are the priorities of Tucson. I think that's really important that we communicate with them. On my end, Andrew, I just wanted to report on federal updates. I don't know if you have federal updates, but as we all have seen, the bipartisan gun safety law was signed, and there was a signing ceremony yesterday at the White House. I had been invited to represent Tucson there, and because I had this council meeting today, I want to make sure that I serve my primary responsibility in running our council meetings. But I asked the White House to invite Pam Simon, who sits on my gun safety task force for the mayor's office. She was able to go and had the opportunity to represent Tucson. The law is the first major gun safety legislation in more than 25 years in our country. And even though I would hope we would have much more thorough and aggressive approach, to gun safety legislation. This particular law does include about $750 million to help states implement and run crisis intervention programs. It closes the boyfriend loophole, requires more gun sellers to register as federally licensed firearm dealers, creates new federal statutes against gun trafficking and straw trafficking, and increases funding for mental health programs throughout the United States. Again, like I said, I would hope that this is not only the beginning, that this is not the end. There's so much more that is needed to respond to this gun violence epidemic that is plaguing our nation. I'm the co-chair of Mayors Against Illegal Guns. I have long been advocating for with mayors across the country for common sense gun safety reforms, and I think we need to continue working on this. The other thing that I wanted to touch on federal updates is that the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade as the law of the nation. So I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge just how much our nation has changed in terms of the rights afforded to more than half of our nation's population since the reversal of Roe v. Wade. Moments after Roe was overturned, abortion clinics in Arizona were immediately forced to close due to a 1901 law that attempts to criminalize all abortions. So this heinous decision by the Supreme Court is already costing lives and will disproportionately affect communities of color and low-income persons. I also want to commend the Mayor and Council for taking proactive action in providing direction to Chief Kasmar to revise our general orders so that arrests will not be made for persons seeking abortion cares in the city of Tucson. So here in Tucson, we will always stand up for the bodily autonomy of all pregnant persons, and I commend you all for the proactive step that we took back in June 7th. I don't know, Andrew, if you wanted to include anything else on federal updates at all.
Mayor, members of the council, just to tag on a little late-breaking news on the gun issue. Today, the United States Senate confirmed Steve Dettelbach as the new director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. He's actually the first Senate-confirmed director in 7 years. The previous administration didn't even nominate someone for that position. So there will be some new leadership in that position as well that may also help address issues of gun safety across the nation.
Well, that's great news. Thank you so much for the update. Any others on the council? Okay, hearing none. Thank you so much, Andrew. Really appreciate it. Item 7, does anyone have any items to remove from the consent agenda? Councilmember Lee.
Mayor, thank you, Mayor. I want to request that we consider liquor license application item 5B number 5 and consent agenda item 7S separately.
We sure will, thank you. Item 8, does anyone have any items for future agendas?
Yes, Your Honor.
Councilmember Cunningham.
All right, this is a little bit unorthodox, but I'm going to try it anyway. We had a miscommunication, I think it was between DSD and County DSD for someone who is doing a lot split permit. And because of the timetable, they asked me if I could request permit number S22-011 retaining to parcel number 1101374D to be put on the August 12th agenda. If it's not ready and staff doesn't have it ready, that's fine. But I wanted to at least follow through so that they know that we're going to try to press to get it done. And I think it was a miscommunication. I don't think totally on our end at all. I just think it was one of those things where it was something to do with having to the parcel was close enough to the Rolito, and that we had to go back, we had to go up to, there's something we have to send to the county and they have to send back, and whatever it was, I'm not sure. Anyway, that's the deal. I know it's unorthodox. 10 years on the council, I've never done that before, but I wanted to just see if that kind of helps the process in this situation.
Mr. Ortega.
Mayor, Councilman Cunningham, if you could send me that information, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Alrighty. Vice Mayor?
I would also like item 11 for the liquor licenses to be considered separately.
All right, we'll do that. Any others? Alrighty, hearing none. Study session is adjourned. The next regularly scheduled study session is scheduled for Tuesday, August 9th. The regular session will begin promptly at 5:30, so we have a bit of a time to stretch our legs and maybe get a snack, and then meet here at 5:30. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Hey, it was something with, what did I have?